The black ribbon kept slipping. Seren had reattached the same length 3 times, fingers working the fabric against the arch frame, while the glass hall held its cold morning breath around her. Outside, the Greymoor stood in fog at the tree line, dark shapes of pine resolving and dissolving as the mist moved through them, and she kept her eyes on the ribbon instead. On the task. On the small, manageable thing directly in front of her. The winter roses were beginning to open in the warmth of the hall, pale and faintly pink at their centres, and their scent drifted through the arrangements like something half-remembered. She had chosen them because Mira loved them. She had not let herself think about that longer than a moment. "Seren," Mira's voice came from across the hall, unhurried and bright. "Come, do the clasp." "My hands are full." Seren stepped down from the stool, crossed the polished stone floor, and found her sister standing in a spill of grey morning light. The moon's silver ceremonial cloak draped over her shoulders like something designed specifically for her, which it had been. Mira looked precisely as the occasion required, luminous, effortless, wearing the future the way she wore everything else, as though it had simply arrived and arranged itself around her. "Here." Seren found the clasp at Mira's throat and worked it closed. Her fingers were steadier than they had any right to be. "It's not too tight?" "No." Mira tilted her chin, checking her reflection in the dark glass of the hall wall. "It'll be cold for the rehearsal. Do you think he'll mind if I wear something over it?" Seren stepped back. "Yeah, I don't know what he minds." It was true. 3 years of peripheral knowledge. 3 years of watching Calum Dre move through rooms like weather, deliberate and unseasonal. And she still could not tell you what he minded. Only what he commanded. Only the particular stillness that settled over a space when he entered it. The way people unconsciously altered their posture. The way she did. She turned back to the arch. "And I am telling you, Seren, not asking." Sabine's voice arrived before the woman did, a low, precise murmur from the corridor beyond the doorway, shaped for one pair of ears. Seren's hands stilled on the ribbon. "The rehearsal feast runs smoothly. You are pleasant. You are useful. You are not noticed." A pause filled with the sound of heeled footsteps drawing closer. "Rowan and Lath's enrollment review is in December. 3 weeks. You understand what I'm saying?" Seren understood. She had understood for 9 years. She turned and offered Sabine a single, composed nod. Sabine moved on without another word. The ribbon was straight. Seren pressed the last pin through fabric, and then Pax was at her elbow. 17 years old and watching her with their shared amber eyes, quiet and too perceptive for any of this to be comfortable. "Have you eaten anything?" he asked. Seren reached for the next rose. "I'm fine." Pax said nothing. He just stood beside her and looked at her hands, which had, at some point, begun to shake. The fog had come in thick off the Greymoor by the time Seren got the last ribbon tied and the last borrowed smile put away. She did not plan to go into the forest. She put on her coat because the cold had moved inside the house, through the walls, into the particular corridor where the estate's older heating refused to reach. And then her feet simply took her toward the tree line the way water moves toward the lowest point in a room. Not decision. Gravity. The deer path swallowed her within 20 steps. This deep into the Greymoor, the fog was not fog so much as atmosphere. Something alive and deliberate, pressing close around her ankles, softening the edges of the ancient cedars until they looked like suggestions of trees rather than the real thing. No sound from the estate reached her here. No Sabine. No clink of rehearsal glassware. No Mira laughing with people who came specifically to hear her laugh. Seren exhaled, and for the first time since morning her chest had room in it. She moved further in than she meant to. The bark of a cedar caught her palm when she misjudged a root in the dark. A clean, shallow cut that opened across her lifeline and stung immediately, bright and cold. She pressed the hand to her coat and kept moving, because stopping felt like something she could not afford yet. She smelled him before she saw him. Not fear. That came a half-second later. A reflex she couldn't help. What she smelled first was cold iron and something older beneath it, something like the air the moment before a storm commits to itself. She stopped walking. The trees stopped moving. Even the fog seemed to pull back slightly. The wolf stepped from the mist, as though it had been holding him in reserve. He was enormous. Silver grey with charcoal threading through the haunches and along the ridge of the spine, and his head low, ears neither flat nor fully raised. Not aggression, something more careful than aggression. He moved in a slow, deliberate arc around her, and she understood that if he had wanted to close the distance, she would not have had the opportunity to understand anything. He was giving her time. She did not know why. She stood very still, her cut hand pressed to her sternum, her heartbeat enormous in her own ears. His nose dropped toward the blood. The sound he made was not a growl, it was something below a growl, a low, sustained note that she felt in the marrow of her back teeth. Then he raised his head and looked at her with pale eyes that were nearly luminous in the dark, and Seren had the vertigo-bright sensation of being seen. Not observed, not assessed, but recognized in a way that had nothing to do with her face. And then he lay down, not in her path. Several yards to the side, between her and the deeper dark, his great head settling onto his forepaws, his pale eyes still on her, watching the trees, watching the dark beyond her shoulder, keeping watch. Seren stood there for a long moment, her breath coming slow, her fear metabolizing into something she had no word for. Then she sat down on a root, carefully, absurdly, the way you might sit near something you did not want to startle, and pressed her bleeding hand harder against her coat, and looked at him looking out for her. She did not move, for a long time. Neither did he. The cars arrived at 9:30. Seren heard them from the kitchen, the low crunch of tyres on gravel, 2 black SUVs moving in practiced formation through the morning fog. She did not go to the window. She had a box of ivory taper candles to inventory and a seating chart that kept refusing to resolve itself, and she had decided, somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, with her cut hand throbbing against its bandage, that she would not allow herself to watch him arrive. She watched him arrive. She stayed behind the kitchen's mullioned glass, half obscured by the curtain's edge, and she watched Calum Dre step out of the lead vehicle and become the largest thing in the yard without appearing to try. Black overcoat, no scarf despite the cold. The fog did not soften him. It simply moved around him the way everything did. 2 council members flanked him, talking. He was not listening. His pale grey eyes moved across Ashford Estate's facade with the quiet efficiency of someone conducting an appraisal, and Seren felt the familiar ache behind her sternum that she had spent 3 years learning to live around. She picked up the candle inventory sheet and went to deliver it. The hallway outside the main receiving room was where it happened. Seren came around the corner with the ledger tucked under one arm and her bandaged hand pressed to her side, and the cold iron scent of him hit her before she saw him clearly. Smoke and something older underneath, something almost geological, and she felt it register in her throat before she registered it anywhere else. She stopped walking. She did not know why. Kylam was 4 feet away speaking to one of the council members. Then he stopped speaking. Seren watched him go still, a fractional thing, barely visible, the way water stills before a stone breaks its surface. His jaw tightened. Now his eyes moved, not toward her, but past her, unfocused, as though something at the edge of his perception had shifted without explanation. He frowned, looked directly at her. Seren held her breath. Kylam looked through her, turned his head, and addressed Mira, who had materialized at the hall's far end in a cream blouse and her most effortless smile. "Mira," his voice was low, even, stripped of anything unnecessary. "We should begin." Mira crossed toward him with the ease of someone walking into light she had always assumed was for her. "You're early. I haven't even had coffee yet." She laughed. He did not, but the severity of his expression did something marginal. Adjusted almost in her direction. "This is my sister, Seren. She's been managing all the arrangements." His gaze returned to Seren. Functional, polite, and the gaze you'd give a well-organized stranger. "Thank you," Calum said. 2 words, addressed to her collarbone. Seren said, "Of course," and moved aside to let them pass. The ledger's edge had left a red line across her palm where she had been gripping it. She hadn't noticed. She noticed now. The rabbit was small and neatly dead. No visible wound. No mess. Laid across the flat top of the cedar stump like something placed rather than dropped. Seren stood at the tree line and looked at it for a long moment before she looked at anything else. The path behind her had been clear this morning. She had noticed without marking it, the way you notice a headache only once it's gone, All those low branches she'd had to duck 3 days ago, the tangle of blackberry cane that had snagged her sleeve. It's the collapsed bough she'd stepped over twice now. Gone. The ground was swept almost clean, the kind of clean that didn't happen on its own in the Greymoor, where things accumulated rather than resolved. She crouched near the stump. The rabbit's fur was still warm. "You shouldn't anthropomorphize a predator," she told herself. "It doesn't mean what you want it to mean." She straightened and kept walking anyway. The fog sat low between the firs, diffusing the thin morning light into something grey and directionless. Seren moved slowly, her breath coming out in small, even clouds, her bandaged hand tucked into her sweater cuff. She had no reason to be here. She came anyway, same as yesterday, same as the day before. Not because the forest gave her anything she could name, but because inside Ashfern Estate she felt like furniture. Out here she felt like something that was at least allowed to breathe. She heard it before she saw it. A low sound from the underbrush to her left. Not wind, not settling bark. Deliberate. The wrong shape of silence that meant something was moving through it with its attention on her. Seren went still. The lesser wolf emerged at a diagonal, young probably or low-ranked, moving with that particular aggressive uncertainty that had more to do with nerves than dominance. Its ears were flat, but its gaze was fixed, tracking her like a problem it hadn't decided how to solve yet. Then the growl came. Not from the young wolf, from somewhere behind and above her, deep enough to feel in the sternum, a sound that was less a warning than a fact. This is what will happen. The young wolf froze, then dropped its gaze, folded itself small, and retreated into the undergrowth in under 4 seconds. No hesitation, no argument, just the immediate, total understanding of hierarchy that wolves carried in the marrow. Seren exhaled. The silver charcoal wolf stepped into the edge of her vision and stopped there, watching her. Not close, not threatening, just present. In the careful way he was always present, as if proximity itself was something he was managing on her behalf. She looked at him. He looked back with pale eyes that held, she thought, entirely too much. "Thank you," Seren said quietly. Her voice sounded strange in the open air, like something she hadn't used correctly in a long time. The wolf's ears tilted forward. He didn't move. She turned back toward the path and she heard him settle, a slow exhale of breath behind her, and the quiet shift of weight into the ground. He wasn't following. He was staying, holding the perimeter she hadn't asked him to hold. Seren walked on and did not examine why that was the safest she had felt in 9 years. The ice came without warning. Seren had taken the eastern path, the one that curved closest to the ravine before looping back toward the estate, because the wolf had cleared it, and cleared paths felt like the only honest gift anyone had given her in years. The fog was still low, the kind that settled into your lungs and made breathing feel deliberate, and the cold had moved overnight from crisp to something harder and meaner, lacquering every flat stone surface with a skin of invisible ice she didn't see until her boot found the edge of a wet rock and her body made a decision before her mind could. She went down fast, ankle twisting on impact, shoulder catching the lip of a stone ledge as she tried to catch herself. The sound she made was not a scream, more a short, sharp exhalation, the kind of sound you make when pain arrives before the nervous system has finished processing the fall. Seren lay still for a moment, cheek against the cold ground, breath coming in shallow pulls. The ravine dropped 6 feet to her right. She hadn't gone over it. That was something. She heard him before she felt him. The low, urgent sound the wolf made, not quite a whine and not quite a growl. Something between the two that carried an emotion she didn't have a clean word for. He appeared at the path's edge, pacing a tight, agitated line. His pale eyes moved over her with an almost frantic precision, reading something in the way she was lying that she couldn't read herself. "I'm fine," Seren said, and the wolf made the sound again, sharper. She wasn't fine. Her ankle was already swelling inside her boot. Kylam came through the tree line 2 minutes later, still pulling his coat closed, his breath visible in the frozen air. He took in the scene in one glance, her position, the ankle, the proximity of the ravine drop, and something moved across his face that was not the cold, controlled expression she had come to associate with him in the hallway, in the formal rooms of Ashfern Estate. That expression was absent entirely. Kylam didn't ask if she was all right. He crouched, got one arm beneath her knees and one at her back, and lifted her with the kind of practiced certainty that left no room for refusal. "I can walk," Seren said. "You can't." Calum said. He was not unkind about it. He was simply factual in the way of someone who has already assessed and concluded and moved on. His arms were very warm against the frozen morning, and Seren, who had learned a long time ago not to lean into things she couldn't keep, leaned anyway, just slightly, because her shoulder ached, and the alternative was to hold herself rigid against a man who was already carrying her, whether she cooperated or not. Calum did not take her to the main house. He carried her through a side entrance Seren hadn't known existed, a narrow door half hidden by climbing ivy gone brown and skeletal in the autumn, and into a room that smelled of old books and disuse. A library sitting room, its furniture draped in pale dust covers except for 2 chairs pulled near a cold fireplace. Calum set her into one of them with a care that was almost incongruous with the size of his hands, then moved without preamble to start the fire. Seren watched him. She didn't know what else to do. When he came back to her, he brought a basin of water from somewhere and a cloth she didn't ask about, and he actually knelt, on the stone floor in front of the chair and began cleaning the blood from her palms where they had caught the ground. Seren watched the top of his head and felt something loosen in her chest that she had been holding clenched for so long she had stopped noticing the pressure. Calum worked in silence. His touch was careful. Not gentle exactly. More precise, deliberate. Now it's like a man who has trained himself to handle breakable things without softness, because softness implied he had noticed they were breakable. "Why did you come?" Seren asked. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I was nearby," Calum said. He didn't look up. She almost left it there. But then he turned her wrist to check the heel of her palm, and the motion shifted the collar of her sweater, and his hands went still. Seren felt it before she understood it, the sudden, absolute quality of his stillness. She looked down. The crescent scar at the base of her collarbone was visible where the neckline had slipped, pale against her warm skin, small and precise and old. Calum stared at it for 3 full seconds. Then, as if he had caught himself at the edge of something, he looked away. He reached for the bandage strip he had set on the basin's edge and began wrapping her ankle, his movements precise, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was doing significant work, not to speak. Seren said nothing. She had spent 9 years learning that some silences were architecture, not emptiness, that what a person didn't say was sometimes the most structural part of them. The fire caught. The room began, slowly, to warm. Outside, fog pressed against the dark window glass, and somewhere at the tree line, she knew without looking, the wolf was still there. She looked at Calum's bent head, at the silver-white scar tracing the edge of his jaw, at hands that had carried her through a frozen morning without being asked. "I was nearby," he had said. She thought about the wolf, pacing in agitated circles before the man arrived. She thought about timing that made no practical sense. She thought about the way his hands had gone still over a scar he had no reason to recognize. Seren pulled the collar of her sweater back up. She did not examine why, for the first time in 3 years, she found she could not look away from him. The ankle kept her indoors. Seren had never been good at stillness. She had always moved through her days like someone outrunning something, which she supposed she had been. But now the bandaged ankle made stairs a negotiation, and the estate felt smaller, its walls closer, its silences more deliberate. Calum had left the library without explanation, the way men like him always left rooms, as though the room had simply stopped being useful. The fire had burned down to coals, the fog outside had thickened. Now she had no reason to stay in the library. She stayed. The map cabinet stood against the far wall. Old oak, deep-jointed, the kind of furniture that predated everything in the room around it. Seren had noticed it, because she noticed things people did not ask her to notice, a habit that cost her more than it gave. She moved to it slowly, weight shifted to her good foot, running her fingers along the edge of the uppermost drawer. The wood was warped slightly along the left side, pulling away from the frame in a way that had nothing to do with time, and everything to do with deliberate pressure applied at some point in the past. She pulled. The bottom panel gave more than the drawer did, a false floor, thin as a letter, lifting free to reveal a compartment no larger than a shoebox. Inside, a folded land survey, and a packet sealed with wax that had cracked and dried to a dead rust colour. And beneath those, a ledger with no title on the cover, just a date embossed in the lower right corner. 23 years ago. Seren lifted the ledger with the particular care of someone who already suspects what they are holding. The entries were formal, bloodless. The administrative language of violence, land transfer, parcelation, voluntary displacement. She recognized the kind of words that meant none of those things. She found the name on the third page. Veska, an Omega-line family described in 2 terse sentences as dual-natured and historically occupying the Brackenvale corridor, the same corridor now absorbed into the lower boundaries of Ashford Estate. Her thumb stopped moving. She opened the sealed packet. Inside, witness statements in different hands, some clearly transcribed under duress. And near the bottom, a single-page testimony, the words uneven, the pen pressed too hard in places, the handwriting of someone doing their final accounting. A dying elder, the notation said. The curse it described was specific. No heir of the Drey blood would recognize his fated mate until the Veska line returned to reclaim what was stolen. The last page was different from the rest. Not a written document, but a sketch. Simple, ink on paper. A crescent mark, small and precise. Located at the base of the left collarbone. Seren's hand moved before her mind gave it permission. She pressed her fingers to the scar beneath her sweater and stood in the cooling library while the fire died completely, and the fog outside pressed against the glass. And the world she had understood herself to be standing in became, quietly and without ceremony, the wrong world entirely. The fire had gone to nothing by the time Rowan found her. And Seren heard him before she saw him, the familiar uneven rhythm of his walk, the way his left foot landed slightly heavier than his right, a habit she'd memorized years ago from listening for him in the dark of houses where she'd needed to know where everyone was. She did not move away from the desk. She did not close the ledger. Rowan stopped in the doorway and read the room the way he always did, slowly, completely. His amber eyes moving from her face to the open pages to her hand, still pressed flat against her sternum. "What did you find?" he said. "Not are you okay? Not what are you doing in here?" He had never wasted time on the questions she would have deflected. It was one of the things she had always quietly loved about him. Seren pulled the collar of her sweater aside instead of answering. And the crescent scar sat at the base of her left collarbone, pale against her skin. She watched Rowan's face, watched the exact moment it stopped being still. He crossed the room and pulled his own collar down without being asked. The mark was smaller. Same shape, same location. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Sabine told me it was a birthmark," Rowan said. His voice came out flat, the careful flatness of someone controlling something that wanted to move fast. "When I was 12, I asked her once and she said, 'Don't.'" He paused. "Just don't." Seren turned the ledger toward him. She pointed to the sketch without touching it again, as though contact might make it more real than she could currently absorb. Rowan looked at it for a long time. "There's a name," Seren said. "Veska. A family displaced from this land 23 years ago. An infant unaccounted for in the record." She stopped. 2 children unaccounted for. The muscle in Rowan's jaw moved. He was 17 and furious and trying very hard not to show her how much. "How long have you known something was wrong?" he asked. "I've known the deal Sabine made with me since I was 13. The words came out steadier than they had any right to. "If I asked questions about where we came from, about why we didn't fit right, she would review your enrollment, yours and Laith's. I stopped asking." The silence that followed was the worst kind. Full. Seren. Rowan's voice cracked on her name. Just once, just slightly, and she felt it in her sternum like a tuning fork struck against bone. "I would have left the academy. I would have left it the first day." "I know," she said. "Then why—" "Because you shouldn't have had to." Rowan closed the ledger with both hands. Deliberate. Final. "We're not Ashbys," he said. "No," Seren agreed. "I don't think we ever were." The feast hall smelled of wood smoke and melted tallow and the particular strain of social performance that passed for celebration in Veerdal. Seren had positioned herself at the edge of it, near the serving corridor, close enough to appear present, far enough to disappear if necessary. She held a glass of something she had not tasted. The chandelier above the long table threw amber light across faces she had spent years learning to read from a distance. Rowan was not here. She had told him to stay upstairs. He had not argued, now which told her he understood the stakes better than she wanted him to. Soren Valek appeared at her left shoulder without introduction. He was attractive in the way visiting diplomats often were, polished, deliberate, aware of the space he occupied. He was from the Culdenmore delegation, she knew that much, one of 3 PAC representatives invited for the pre-ceremony gathering. He had been watching her for most of the evening, and she had noted it the way she noted most things, quietly, and without letting it change her face. "You've been standing in the same place for 40 minutes, Valek said. His voice carried the unhurried ease of someone who had never once been told no by a woman he'd chosen to notice. Seren said nothing. "Dance with me." Not a question. He turned it over in his mouth like something he'd already decided. I'm not a guest," Seren said. Flat. Final. Valek smiled. He reached out and turned her wrist. Just slightly, just enough. His thumb pressing the thin skin at its inside. The touch was practiced. Proprietary. "You smell extraordinary," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "Like something old. Something that shouldn't be hidden in a serving corridor." Her stomach turned. She did not move. She had learned long ago that moving registered as reaction, and reaction was an invitation to continue. She felt the shift before she heard it. The air pressure changed, the way it does before lightning, that charged and weightless moment when everything decides what it is about to become. Seren's gaze moved across the hall on instinct, and she found Calum Dre already moving. He was not rushing. And that was the thing that made the room go quiet before anyone understood why. He crossed the hall at a pace that was entirely controlled, entirely deliberate, and somehow more frightening than a man running. His silver-grey eyes were fixed on Valek's hand at her wrist, and they were doing something she had not seen them do before. Flickering, the iris bleeding lighter at the rim, almost luminous in the low light. Kylam's hand closed around Valek's wrist and removed it from Seren's without a word. Clean, like correcting a mistake in a document. The sound that followed was not loud. It came from somewhere below speech, chest deep, involuntary, and it moved through the hall like a current through standing water. Every conversation stopped. Valek went still. Across the table, Sabine's wineglass hovered halfway to her lips and did not move. The council members nearest the fireplace turned with the careful slowness of people who knew they were watching something they should not name. Kylam did not look at Seren. He looked only at Valek, and his voice, when it came, was quiet in the way that made quiet dangerous. "Leave her." 2 words. No title, no explanation. Valek straightened, recalibrated, and withdrew. The retreat measured enough to preserve some dignity, but a retreat nonetheless. He crossed to the far end of the room without looking back. The hall remained suspended for 3 full seconds before sound returned in cautious fragments. Seren stood exactly where she had been standing, her wrist at her side, her pulse going somewhere she could not follow. Calum finally looked at her, but his eyes were returning, slowly the silver dimming back to grey. But not all the way. Not yet. He said nothing. His jaw was set hard, and there was something working behind his expression that he was not going to let out. Not here, not in front of 40 witnesses who had already seen too much. Seren looked back at him, and for one unguarded moment, before either of them could stop it, the space between them said everything their mouths had not. Then Mira's voice carried across the room, bright, inquiring, angled toward Calum, and the moment sealed itself shut like a wound closing over something still inside it. Seren set her untouched glass down on the nearest surface and walked toward the corridor. No one stopped her. No one looked at her directly. But she felt it, the weight of every pair of eyes in the room that had watched Calum Dre lose, for 15 seconds, complete and terrifying control, and understood with a clarity that sat cold in her chest that nothing about the next 24 hours was going to hold the shape it had been given. The archive room had no fire. Seren had not bothered to find the light switch. She stood in the dark with the ledger open against her chest, and the massacre records spread across the reading table like evidence at a trial, her breath visible in the cold air that leaked through the old casement windows. The house had settled into its late-night silence around her. The feast was still audible somewhere, a distant current of voices and glass, and she had walked away from it with the specific and focused calm of someone who has made a decision they cannot unmake. She heard Calum before she saw him. Not footsteps. He moved without announcing himself, but the shift in air pressure when the door opened. The room's cold deepened slightly, then steadied. Seren did not turn around. "You knew about the Veska displacement," she said. Her voice came out flatter than she intended. "Tell me how much." A long pause, the kind that meant he was choosing, not searching. "A purge my father authorized." Caelim's voice came from just inside the doorway, low and measured. 23 years ago, a disputed land claim. I inherited the account of it. The account of it. Seren finally turned. In the dark, his pale eyes caught what little light existed and held it. There are names in that ledger. Children. When an infant listed as unrecovered. She set the open page on the table between them and pressed 2 fingers to it without breaking eye contact. This is not a disputed land claim. This is a grave your family built a dynasty on top of. Something moved across Caelim's expression that his control did not quite catch in time. Seren pulled the collar of her sweater down and exposed the scar. The crescent, pale and precise against her collarbone. She watched his eyes drop to it. Watched his stillness become a different kind of stillness. "The infant," she said quietly. There were 2. The shift in him was not visible so much as felt. A pressure change, like the air before a storm chooses its direction. Caelim took 1 step forward and stopped himself. His jaw was hard. His breathing had changed. Seren. Her name in his mouth had a different weight than it had ever carried before. Not the clipped syllable of functional acknowledgement. Something older. His wolf did not know how to hide what his face was trying to. "Don't," she said. The word was soft and absolute. "Don't look at me like that yet. You don't get to. Not until you understand what your family took." Caelim stood very still in the dark with her accusation between them and his curse fracturing at the edges of his restraint, and she could see the moment he stopped calculating. "I know what was taken," he said. He wasn't talking about land. The cold in the room did not change. Neither of them moved, but something between them, some final pretense of distance, folded quietly and did not rise again. The duffel bag sat at the foot of the bed, like a confession. Seren had packed it in the dark, moving by feel and memory. A change of clothes, the ledger photocopied twice onto folded paper. The cash she'd kept in the lining of her winter coat for 3 years because some part of her had always known she might need to run. She pressed Rowan's shoulder once to wake him, watched his amber eyes open and find her face, and did not have to say anything. He sat up. He'd been half expecting this. "Lower road," she told him quietly. "Take Laith. Wait 15 minutes. Rowan held her gaze for a long moment, reading her the way he had always been able to, the way no one else bothered, and then nodded without argument. That cost him something. She could see it. She didn't have time to honour it. Outside, the cold hit her like an open hand. Fog lay thick over the grounds, low and unmoving. He swallowing the tree line in grey wool. The ceremony would begin in 4 hours. Mira would be dressing already, or dreaming of it. The estate behind Seren was warm and lit, and utterly indifferent to her leaving, and she did not look back at it. She followed the path toward the Greymoor's edge, the one she'd worn into the frost herself over the last week, her bandaged ankle aching in a dull, rhythmic way she'd learned to move through. The forest smelled of iron and pine sap, and something older beneath both, earth that predated the pack's claim on it. Her earth. She understood that now in a way she hadn't had language for before. She was 30 feet from the tree line when the wolf stepped into the path. Seren stopped. He was silver in the moonlight, the silver charcoal she'd come to know by the quality of his stillness. He did not lunge, did not posture. He simply stood in the centre of the path with his pale eyes fixed on her face and waited, the fog parting gently around his legs like water around stone. Not blocking. She registered that immediately. He'd left her room on either side. He was giving her the choice. Something broke open in Seren's chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, devastating relief of a thing that has been held under pressure for too long. "I can't keep doing this," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. The wolf's ears shifted, not forward in aggression, but slightly to the side, attentive in the way living things are when they understand more than you've said. Being in a room and not mattering, standing next to her and being air. "I can't—" She stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth. And the wolf took one step forward, just one, and then lowered his great silver head slowly until his eyes were level with hers, pale and luminous and completely, unbearably present. Serene had not been truly seen in 9 years. It destroyed her, and it saved her in the same breath. She did not take another step toward the road. The wolf became a man at the tree line. Serene watched it happen. Not grotesque, not the violent unmaking she'd been raised to fear, but something quieter, a silver light releasing, a shape surrendering to another shape. And then Kylam stood in the dark at the edge of the grey moor, barefoot in frozen grass, wearing only dark trousers, his breath visible in the pre-dawn cold. He said her name, Serene. Not the Ashby girl, not Mira's sister, just that. Her name in his mouth like he was learning the weight of it, like it cost him something to say and he was paying willingly. Serene didn't move. Her bandaged ankle throbbed. The duffel bag hung from her shoulder like a question she no longer knew how to answer. Kylam crossed the distance between them slowly, the way you move towards something you are terrified of losing before you've named it yours. He stopped close enough that she could smell wood smoke and cold iron, and beneath it something raw and undone, the scent of a man whose control had finally run out of road. "My wolf has known you," he said, "since the first night." I know. She had always known. The wolf had never looked through her. His hand came up to her face, not grabbing, not commanding, just his thumb beneath her jaw, and tipping her chin so she had nowhere to look but at him. His eyes in the grey pre-morning were not cold. They had never been cold. They had been cursed. The kiss was not tender. It was recognition. The specific violence of two people who have held themselves apart past the point of endurance, finally releasing the held breath. She felt it move through her like a current finding ground, felt something in her chest answer it with a warmth that was not human and had never been. "Tell me to stop," Kylam said, against her mouth. Serene tilted her head, exposed the left side of her throat, the crescent scar, pale against brown skin. Her answer. His mouth found the mark. The bite, when it came, was precise and total. Not violence, but arrival. The pain lasted 1 white second, and then the clearing flooded with cedar and something older, and something that had no name in any language Verdal currently spoke. Serene's knees buckled and Kylam caught her, and she convulsed once, twice, her amber eyes blown wide and then luminous, gold and wholly not human, as the Veska nature surfaced through 9 years of silence like a tide that had simply been waiting for the shore. The curse shattered. She felt it go, a pressure she hadn't known she'd been living under, releasing in every direction at once. Dawn broke thin and cold over the grey moor. Kylam held her upright, his face pressed to her hair, his breathing uneven for the first time she had ever witnessed. Around them the fog lifted, degree by degree, and the ancient trees of the forest stood witness to the only true ceremony Ashford Estate would host this season. No altar, no audience, no borrowed ritual. Just a woman who finally took up the space she was always owed. Just a man who had finally learned to see.